Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on boomeranging back to your old job, how to return to a previous employer. If you've been to a FlexJobs webinar before, certainly we welcome you back. And if it is your first webinar, thanks for joining us today. We always start our webinars just kind of taking a few seconds or a minute to get situated and focused. So while we're doing that, you can feel free to share where you are joining us from in the chat box. This is my favorite part of webinars, seeing where everybody is coming in from. And while you're doing that, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. We do have time at the end of this presentation for a Q&A session. So in the Q&A section of Big Marker, feel free to type in any questions you have about the content or anything that comes to mind as we are going through all of the slides. It's best to put them in the Q&A, of course, and not the chat section, because in the Q&A, not only can you see other people's questions and upvote or give them a thumbs up if you'd like them answered, it's where we, as the coach, will go during the Q&A to find those questions. Feel free to use the chat area to share information you have or experience you have as a Boomerang employee, or just saying hello to others who are here. With the questions, we typically can't get to everybody's questions that are asked, but we always answer quite a few, and I promise that you will learn something from the questions that we do answer. You don't have to take very furious notes during the course of the presentation unless you really want to. We are recording this, and we will be recording the Q&A as well, and passing along a link to the video as well as any resources that we refer to during the presentation, and you will have that within the next few days. In terms of the recording, please note that this portion, the presentation portion, has been pre-recorded, but there is a career coach here live, and the Q&A following the presentation will, of course, be live with one or two of our career coaches. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into today's topics. Today, what we're going to talk about are a few topics. Number one, what is a Boomerang employee? Number two, what are the current trends and projections that we are seeing and that we expect to see? Number three, reasons you might consider becoming a Boomerang employee. And of course, I already mentioned the audience Q&A. Okay, so Boomerang employees, let's go. What is a Boomerang employee? Well, a Boomerang employee is someone who returns to a previous employer. There was a recent Wall Street Journal article that cited data from a company called WorkHuman, and one of their clients is actually LinkedIn. And that data showed that the number of Boomerang workers has increased in companies that are using LinkedIn this year. Boomerangs accounted for 4.5% of all new hires among companies on the professional networking website. So any company that has a page on LinkedIn in 2021, Boomerang employees accounted for 4.5% of all new hires. That is up from 3.9% over the same period in 2019. And an interesting fact, too, is LinkedIn itself jumped on the Boomerang bandwagon this year, hiring twice as many former employees compared to the number they hired in 2019 as Boomerang employees. In general, 15% of employees have gone back to a former employer, sometime in their career. 40% of us who are employees say we would consider boomeranging back to a company where they had previously worked. I thought it was interesting, 46% of millennials say that they would consider this, 33% of Gen Xers, and 29% of baby boomers. we will have some specific examples from FlexJobs experience, FlexJobs as a company's experience with Boomerang employees. But when talking about Boomerang employees with employers, very high percentage, 76%, in fact, of HR professionals say they are more accepting of hiring Boomerang employees now than they were in the past. So this is something that's certainly encouraging if you are considering or thinking about going back to a former employer. 40% of HR professionals say their organization hired about half of their former employees who reapplied for a job with them. So if 10 people that used to work at the company reapplied again, about 5 of them would get hired in 40% of companies, which I think is interesting. And 56% of HR professionals and 51% of managers say they do give high or really high priority to Boomerang job applicants who left in good standing. And if you've been to some of our webinars before, you know it's really important if you're going to leave a job to not burn any bridges and to leave in good standing. And certainly if you ever want to go back to a former employer, this can help you. There we go. All right. Boomerang candidates provide benefits to the organization that they will return to. And also, as a Boomerang employee, there are benefits to you as well. So let's take a look at some of the benefits from both perspectives. You as a job-seeking candidate, and of course, also as your former employer. So if we look at your potential benefits, certainly a great benefit for you in this process is your familiarity with the organization's processes and procedures. You could be a great rehire because you could come back and very quickly hit the ground running, as they say, because of previous experience. And really, I think that this is a benefit not only for you kind of easing into a new job, but of course also to the organization. Boomerang employees tend to be more successful because they've already have established internal networks, connections, and of course, knowledge of the company, which makes it easier for them to be more effective in their position more quickly. So the learning curve is not as high when you return. For policy and procedural purposes, your former employer will have you on board probably, most similarly to any new hire and how that onboarding would look. And that is, part of their hiring processes and requirements, but it also demonstrates to others at the organization when you go through the onboarding process again, that you aren't going to receive, special treatment because you've been there once before. In the experience of FlexJobs, we talked to our HR team and a current employee who has Boomerang back. But in terms of HR and onboarding here, typically it's streamlined at FlexJobs, assuming that much of what was known prior is the same as what they need now. There will still be our process here where we have check-ins with our manager and with HR every 30, 60, 90 days. And that stays the same at FlexJobs if you Boomerang back, and it can be more focused on, the kind of the differences in the experience, or it picks up at a different level than it would, say, your first 30-day go around. But the process is really still the same. So what are some company benefits to being a Boomerang employer or accepting Boomerang employees at an organization? These employees can be assets for employers. So in some ways or reasons as to why employers may look at turning to Boomerang candidates it is a reduced expense for training or certification, as returning workers likely already had that certification when they worked at the organization before, or have since acquired the necessary qualifications for employment. So that's definitely a benefit. It can improve employee morale across the organization as other employees see that you don't hold grudges when somebody leaves and is interested in coming back to the organization. Since returning workers are more likely to stay long term, and there tend to be fewer surprises associated with hiring someone you already know, there is a reduced risk with this particular type of hire than hiring somebody who is brand new to the organization. And finally, rehires can bring fresh ideas to the team because of their outside experience or the recent experience they had since leaving. And this can ultimately help the team and the business grow. And so that's definitely a benefit that companies can see from hiring an employee who has been there before. All right. So if you are in a job search and you want to add the potential to return to a former employer and maybe become a Boomerang employee, what kinds of things should you do and what considerations should you have? So keeping lines of communication open and continuing to build the relationship after you leave a position is important. So even if you haven't done this yet and you might do it in the future, just remember that again, you don't want to burn any bridges, and keeping those lines of communication open, even after you leave a position, is valuable. Our connections and relationships with others really can help during transition periods. And if you're mindful of how you left or will leave a position, that can have an impact on what it's like if you return. So continue to build those bridges instead of burn those bridges. And that, I think, is a really big deal. When you are thinking and have narrowed down the specific employer you'd like to return to, go back and review your resignation letter to kind of re-examine how you resigned, what was the reason for your resignation, and what words did you use? What was the choice of wording? And hopefully the phrasing within your letter was professional, gracious, and complimentary to allow for an opening of conversations in this type of a situation. You want to make sure that you have an open mind because things change. And this might be the best and most important tip to a Boomerang employee because things are not going to be the same when you go back. My family has moved a lot throughout my husband's career, and you think you want to go back to a place that you've lived, and we have in fact done that, but it's not the same. Things change, so you have to keep an open mind, and I'm sure we all have experiences like that we can recall where that has been the case. People, processes, and companies change and grow, which has most certainly happened since you've been at your employer. And it will just make things easier for you if you realize and understand that things are going to be different the second time around. As a Boomerang candidate, know that your former employer has more contacts at their disposal for a reference check, meaning they can and will reach out to previous coworkers, previous teammates, and your supervisors. Here are some questions that they might ask those folks. What was it like to work with them? What were their main strengths and weaknesses? Would you want to work with them again? Why or why not? So these are things that you can kind of think through and see how they may be answered about you so that you can be prepared. And whether you reached out to your previous employee about an opportunity or they reached out to you about a potential opportunity, it is important to realize that you are probably not the only candidate who is qualified for the position. You have to take the interview seriously because that's still going to be a very important part of the hiring process. Just like a traditional interview, you want to do complete research on the company and who is going to be interviewing you as an important first step. And maybe it's a small company and you know these people pretty well and you have relationships with them, but if it's a bigger company and you're returning to it, you may be meeting some new people. There might have been a leadership change within the company since you left. So research and preparing will help you determine not only if the fit still exists, but also prepare you for success when you go in to meet with them. Chances are you've gained new skills while you were away as well. So it's important to make that known and state how you have grown since you left the organization. And this will end up helping you negotiating your salary should you receive an offer. Be aware that you may not be able to negotiate other benefits. However, this is a great opportunity and time for you to see if there have been adjustments or changes to the benefits that were offered before, or vacation policies, for example, and kind of evaluate there. It is good practice to keep in mind that the process might be slightly different depending on the size of the company and the type of role you return to. Smaller companies, it might be more conversational, as I said, and larger companies, it might be a bit more formal and with people that you have not met before. All right, so here are some interview questions that you want to consider. If you can find out who you'll be interviewing with, that will be helpful. You could be prepared that you could be interviewing and interacting with new employees or ones that you have worked with previously, which might make a difference. So with that in mind, make sure you describe both your past accomplishments and responsibilities, as well as any new skills you may have gained since you left. Be prepared for tough questions like, what made you leave your position here? Why do you want to return? If we rehire you, how long do you plan to stay? And what would make you leave again? You will want to own the story of your decision to leave and manage any concerns or labeling that you could have as being a flight risk. Focus more, if you can, on the specific reasons why you are excited to come back and what you have missed about the company and the work that you did. And remember, it's okay to admit that you made a mistake in leaving and be very gracious for the opportunity to interview as a Boomerang candidate. Talking to our HR team, they, let us know that in the first interview with a potential Boomerang candidate, they will ask these specific questions, some of them that we have on the slide. Why did you leave and why do you want to come back? That is something that's really important for the team to know. Also, in that first interview here at FlexJobs, the HR team would kind of give a glimpse into those changes that may have happened since the person left and is now coming back. So it's important that all of the information is out there for the potential new, Boomerang hire, as well as information, kind of given to the organization based on what's changed since you left. All right. There are also questions that you should be prepared to ask in a return interview to an employer. As I mentioned, FlexJobs does have Boomerang employees, and we wanted to reach out for some of these specific questions. And one of the things that, came up was what changes have occurred in the company and team structuring. The people that we talked to who have boomeranged back to FlexJobs thought it was, really a desirable option because they liked the culture, the resources, and the people in the organization. And so that is something that, kind of gave them a motivation to try to return. Another question that you could ask is how have work processes and standard operating procedures evolved? How do you evaluate my return to the company? What would you like me to accomplish within the first 30, 60, and 90 days of my return? So that's something that is important to ask as well, so you have a clear understanding of those expectations. And of course, here is a best practice. Remember, after an interview, you always want to send a thank you note, and that doesn't change if you are returning to an organization. In fact, you might even be able to make it more personal if you know the people that you interviewed with. It's always good to keep fostering that relationship. So if you do return and you do get the offer, the relationship continues in a positive way. So let's go over the action steps. You want to identify any previous employers to target and think about how your exit went and was it graceful and what things do you need to really be prepared to address. Begin corresponding with them. highlight any new skills and experience and growth that you've achieved. Review, revise, and tailor your application materials. As always, get prepared for that interview, and don't forget to follow up and send a thank you note after it's finished. All right. So as I promised, we will be going to our Q&A in just a minute. Again, as a reminder, we'll be sending you a copy of the recording as well as resources that will be emailed shortly within the next few days. Go to the FlexJobs.com blog to find a vast amount of free articles, resources, webinars, and videos for members and non-members alike. So please feel free to put those questions in the Q&A box, and let's go ahead and move to those and get started. Hey y'all, it's Tony here. Excited to go through these questions. I see some in the Q&A, so without further ado, let's just dive right in. Let's see here. What if the reason for separation was due to a situation where there was discord? Is it still wise to reapply in the healthcare industry? This is a great question. And, sometimes in the healthcare industry, the company that you work for is a really big company with a lot of opportunities. I would say if you were in a situation where there was some discord, and you would like to go back to the company at some point, I would start by building back up and fostering relationships with people who work at the company, and working from there. I certainly think you want to, we have a webinar coming up on personal branding and, kind of managing your personal reputation. And this is one of those instances where you might have to do some quote unquote cleanup, I guess, depending on what the discord was. There's a number of different reasons for that. So I think that your best bet is to start to foster and build back some relationships. And it might not be with your direct supervisor from previously. It might be with some other folks, or if you're eyeing a different area of the company, that could be helpful as well. What about involuntary separation due to downsizing and restructuring? I assume here you're asking about if you can boomerang back, or if you would like to. Is that a good idea? And I think the answer to that is, certainly if you were a product, I guess, of a reduction in force, or because of restructuring and the company is hiring again, certainly. Think about, how you left and, what conversations were had then. And again, start fostering those relationships and working your way back in, or with new folks who maybe were restructured into your department or your area. That can be really helpful too. And if people, it might be nice for them to know that you would be interested in coming back if another opportunity presents itself. All right, next question. Would it be best to get referred back to an employer if attempting to boomerang, or formally applying as a former employee? I think if you have anyone who would be able to, support you in your reapplication process, I really think you can do both. I think you certainly could go through a former network connection at the organization. You also could, go through the normal applying channels and list on those applications. I think what you're referring to is the question, have you ever worked here before? And obviously you would answer that, and that would be in your information. But anytime you can bring in somebody who is working there currently and who knows you and who knows your work, that can be really helpful. I'll share just a little anecdote. My sister is, has been thinking about doing some things with a former organization. And, one of the things that she did was reach out to her former supervisor and talk with her a lot about making her decision on whether or not she wanted to apply. And, having that connection can be really helpful. All right, last question. If you have any other questions, we do still have some time, so feel free to type those in. In the questions you should ask section, what did you mean by how do you evaluate my return to the company? Yeah, so if you are talking to your former employer, this question is probably more for somebody that you worked with in the past at that organization and really just kind of trying to dive in to figure out, how will you be evaluated as you come back? Will it be the same way as before? For most companies, I imagine you would kind of pick up right where you left off. Um, or you wouldn't pick up right where you left off, but in some instances, maybe you do. It really will just depend on the company. So I think, the key here for some of those questions that you should ask is you really want to have open lines of communication if you're going to, for any employer that you work for. But I think in this instance, when you are returning, that is something that will help set you and the organization and your manager up for success moving forward. All right. I'm just going through. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, but since we have some time, I'm going to scan the chat. Thank you guys for your questions today. It looks like we got them. You bet. You're welcome. Happy to answer. And yes, I do like this comment. Everyone has their own scenarios. It's safe to say that the last few years of work has not been the same. Absolutely. I think every day I know on our team, there's been times that we've, come to work and been like, what's going to happen next? So we all kind of are in this together, aren't we? Okay, well, again, just as a reminder, you will be sent a link to this recording and the resources that have been included, and you should check for that within the next few days. If you don't see it, please check your spam folder. We will be back next week. I guess it's Thursday today. We'll be back next week with additional webinars. And as always, thank you for coming, and we will catch you next time. Bye now.